This time, there's no wedding, no bachelor party. What could go wrong, right? But when the wolf pack hits the road, all bets are off. This is The Hangover Part 3.
I told myself I would never come back.
Don't worry, it all ends tonight.
Someone needs to burn this place to the ground.
Woo! I like that.
Lisa, can you remember me? I'm the one that picked the option. Lisa, can you remember me?
I'm a huge fan of The Hangover. I wasn't really as much of a fan of The Hangover Part 2 because it was basically a rehash of the first one. There were some funny parts in it, obviously. I laughed a lot while I was in the theater, but looking back, it's not that good. So I wasn't really sure what to expect from The Hangover 3 because, in my mind, I had an idea of what I wanted to happen in Part 2, and then it kind of seemed like that was going to happen in Part 3. So I was thinking maybe it'll go the right way, maybe it'll just be a rehash again, and I'm happy to say that not only is it not a rehash, but it went the way that I wanted it to, even better than I could have expected. I loved The Hangover Part 3. The weird thing about it is that I thought Part 2 was very funny, but the overall movie was lacking. In this one, I actually thought that it was less funny, but the movie itself was better. The story, the twists, there were a lot of really interesting and surprising things about The Hangover Part 3 that I was just really, really happy about, sitting in the theater, grinning ear to ear. Now, obviously, if you don't like The Hangover or The Hangover Part 2, you probably won't like The Hangover Part 3 because it's more of the same. It's definitely a little different. It's different than both movies prior to it in a good way. It needed to be because obviously the second one wasn't and needed to be, but I actually think this should have been Part 2. I wish that it went from Part 1 to Part 3, skipped over Bangkok, barely any mention of Bangkok in Part 3, but there's a lot of mention of the first one. But let's get a little more into The Hangover Part 3, starting off with the plot and the writing. The storyline is completely different than any of the other Hangover movies, and I understand if somebody thinks, well, then it's not a Hangover movie. If there's no hangover, what's the point? I get that, but at the same time, it's a continuation of what the first Hangover started. And like I said, it's what I wanted for Part 2. I am not at all bothered by the fact that there's no hangover to drive the story. I love the fact that it brought back elements from the first movie, that it was kind of clever. Some of it felt a little bit shoehorned, but it worked. We saw characters from the first one, we saw plot lines from the first one come up again, and it was just what a Part 2 should have been, and what a Part 3, you know, it's good because it wrapped it up and it brought it back to the first one. Now, like I said, it's not as funny, I don't think, as the other two, or at least the first one for sure, but that didn't bother me. And once again, I understand if someone is bothered by the fact that it's not as funny because it is The Hangover, but I really liked the fact that it was darker and it was more focused on the story than on the laughs, which is what I think the second one, I think that was the problem. It had plenty of laughs, but a really weak story because it was just the same as the first one. To a point, it doesn't really work on its own because the characters are just put into the movie because we know them already from the other two movies, but there were some legitimate twists, some really interesting plot elements to this movie that I thought made it really appealing to anyone that just likes a good story, because I was genuinely surprised by just one major thing that happens in the middle of the movie. I was sitting there in the theater, jaw on the floor. I couldn't believe that I was surprised by The Hangover Part 3. I wasn't expecting to have something like that happen. But I'm also very happy with the directing. In the second one, obviously, it just felt very tired. It was the same old thing again. In this one, it actually felt fresh, it felt different, and it felt like they were having a lot of fun changing things up. And I would say that there were a lot of interesting visual elements, specifically when there's like a strobe light going on at a party sort of later on in the movie, and there was some real genuine peril that had me on the edge of my seat in the chase scene, in the roof scene, all that stuff. I was sitting there just shocked by the fact that I was feeling these things in The Hangover Part 3. The one issue I have is that it kind of seems like they don't know when to stop a good joke or just a good scene before it kind of drives itself into the ground a little bit, goes on a little too long. There are a few moments like that throughout. Mainly the one that I'm going to talk about in the spoilers coming up is a scene toward the end that I think goes on a little bit too long. Otherwise, it could have been perfect. And so I'm sitting there like, just cut, 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 and they don't. So I would say that's the one problem I have is, you know, just cut it back a little bit. I think it's better if you don't overdo it. And acting-wise, a couple surprises here. First of all, we've got the old cast back. Bradley Cooper, Ed Helms, I would say they do their thing. No better, no worse, but that's fine. Zach Galifianakis, which is, he's usually kind of like the funniest guy there, along with Ken Jeong. He, I thought, was a little bit less funny in this one, which is kind of disappointing. It kind of felt like he became too aware of what's funny about the character, and so that sort of surprise was gone because it felt like they knew what they were doing, if that makes any sense. But who I thought was funnier this time around, who I thought was less funny in Part 2, was Ken Jeong, Mr. Chow. I thought that he was hysterical. I was cracking up at just about everything he said, and not even in just like a lame way, like, oh, he said it in a funny voice, ha ha ha. It's the way that he does it. he's got like just this deadpan, and he says the most ridiculous shit, and it is just hilarious. We also have some new people this time around. We got John Goodman, who I knew would be fantastic, and he was great. He fit right in. It was perfect. It was very, very funny. Melissa McCarthy, who, thank God, is used sparingly, because I think she's funniest, and, you know, I guess that's kind of unfortunate for her, but I think she's funniest when she's used little. Very little, and she's got her best moments in there rather than, you know, constantly throughout the whole movie. She's in it very little, and the times that she's in it are pretty funny. But now I'm going to talk about some spoilers. If you have not seen The Hangover Part 3, trust me, there are legitimate twists. You don't want to know what happens. I'm going to reveal some cameos and stuff like that that you might not have known. Let's start off with the cameos. Let's start off light. First of all, Mike Epps as Black Doug. I was so happy when I saw him because I knew it was going to go in the direction that I wanted it to from the start. When Hangover Part 2 was coming out, I said, bring it back to the first one, and so I was really excited right there. Then, of course, we had Heather Graham, who had a very small part, but I'm glad she was in it enough that they kind of just brought her back. I didn't think it was a big deal. It didn't feel very self-serving. It felt legitimate. Plus, it brought Alan back to the baby Carlos. Now, I was watching the movie, and I thought that it was the same baby. I thought it was the same kid, but IMDb only lists him in The Hangover Part 3, so maybe it's not the same kid. He looked like him. Maybe it is. I don't know. But if not, he looked like him, so I thought it was perfect, and when he put the glasses on him. Earlier in the review, I mentioned that I felt genuine peril, like I was on the edge of my seat, and I gotta say, it was in the chase scene, but it was mostly in the roof scene when they were climbing down. I was terrified because I'm a little bit afraid of heights, so I was pretty scared just because it looked legit. I'm assuming they were on a green screen, or was that real? It looked real, so it was kind of freaking me out, and I was cracking up, but also petrified. My heart stopped when Zach Galifianakis, well, when he fell, my heart stopped, but then my heart really stopped. I think I died for a second when he jumped. And he jumped too far, landed on the edge, and teetered off, and then he had to be held back. I pooped my pants in fear and in laughter. It was great. But nothing beats the middle of the movie when I just was shocked. I was legitimately shocked at the fact that they really surprised me. I was wondering, whose house is this? When they said, Ken Jeong says it's some .com millionaire's house, whatever, I totally bought it. And you know what? I don't know if they intended it, but I was totally misdirected because I was thinking, who's the cameo going to be? Is it going to be Charlie Sheen? That's kind of old. Is it going to be Bill Gates? Is it going to be Mark Zuckerberg? I didn't know. And I was thinking, who's it going to be? So that distracted me. Even when somebody who I was with suggested maybe it's John Goodman's house, I was like, no, it doesn't make any sense, because why would he be going back to get his gold buried in his house? It doesn't make any sense. Never once did I even realize, and maybe it was obvious to everybody else, but luckily for me, I didn't even see it coming. Not once did I realize that it could possibly work out the way it did, and when that unfolded, the whole theater, just, you could hear, like, everyone sitting up in their seats like, oh shit, I wasn't expecting a twist like this. Now, the one thing I have to say before I wrap up this review is the ending. I want to say the scene that I thought went on too long was the mid-credits scene. When the movie was ending and you saw that it was going to be a wedding, I was thinking, oh my god, this movie would be perfect if it ends with them partying and waking up and there's a bunch of crazy shit and then it goes to credits. They never return to it. I don't want a Hangover Part 4. I'm perfectly fine with it ending like that. So as soon as the credits rolled, I thought, damn, that would have been perfect to include a scene at the end where they have a hangover. Oh well, I still enjoyed the movie. Wait, they had the scene. Mid-credits scene. Comes back on, everything is crazy. There's like a motorcycle through, you know, the wall. There's like a chain gun. I don't know, a bunch of crazy shit. I was so happy. And then when Ed Helms walked out with the implants, I thought it was absolutely brilliant, because where do you go from what they've done in the past? That was something I would have never expected. Then, unfortunately, I think it should have ended with him looking down at the implants, making his little gag noise, which is hilarious, and then cut to black, and that's it. Then it went on to Ken Jeong walking out naked, and I thought that it kind of overdid it. However, I'm not complaining. It's not that big of a deal. Overall, I really, really did love The Hangover Part 3. I'm very, very happy with it. But I am very curious to know what you thought of The Hangover Part 3, because like I said, I totally understand if you didn't like the fact that it was a little less funny, it was darker, there was no hangover. I get it. Let me know what you thought of those elements, or the lack thereof. Let me know what you thought of the movie overall. I really do want to know. But let me know anything that you want about The Hangover Part 3, and that's pretty much it.
We've been on a lot of adventures together, but it seems like you haven't learned anything. Anything. I'll be in the limo.